you all. We are going to be starting in a moment. Welcome to the pavilion of the EIB and Benelux. We're very happy this morning to be hosting a joint event between the EIB and BNP Paribas on a crucial issue which has been very much at the center of discussions here at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and that is the pace of the current, the clean energy revolution. We know there have been huge advances in our current technologies, but what we're going to talk about today is actually what we can do to accelerate some of the new technologies of the future. And we have a fantastic panel here. We're waiting for one more of our colleagues, but we're going to kick off anyway. I'll introduce you to them all in a moment, but just to say, we're going to be talking about the regulatory framework that exists currently, the ways in which we can accelerate investment, and then how we can actually turn that from a European enterprise into a global set of solutions. And that's going to be a key word we're going to be talking about today. So with us we have representatives from public banks, from the private sector, from developers themselves. And I'm going to hand over first, though, to our Director General of Operations at the European Investment Bank, Jean-Christophe Laloux, who has been spearheading recently the efforts of the European Investment Bank in terms of the actual projects, the actual implementation, which is what this COP is about. Over to you.
Thank you, Shireen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you to our colleagues from BNP Paribas for co-organizing this with us, and to the panelists for accepting our invitation. So a few introductory words from my side to get us in the mood for the panel. Wind, solar and battery technologies, as we know, have progressed tremendously, and yet we are absolutely not where we should be. Fossil fuel powers still 80% of our lives today. Global greenhouse gas emissions have not dropped significantly over the past decade, and we are on a course of 2.5 to 2.8% degrees global warming if we don't do anything. So what should we focus on? What should we do? What should we focus on? Should we bet on market incentives, like in the US with the IRA? Or should we put our bets on regulatory solutions and subsidies like in the European Union? Or should we put our focus on energy savings? I was listening to Monsieur Picard recently in a conference we organized in Lisbon, telling us that 3/4 of the energy we produce is actually wasted, and that the best possible investment you can make is in energy savings. Or should we put our bets on technology? Can we just continue and hope that technology will solve the problem for us? Well, it's a difficult question, and indeed probably the answer lies in a bit of everything, a bit of all of those. But let me tell you what we in EIB try to do. We actually lean on the possibilities of technologies, and we're not the only ones to do so. The latest report of the United Nations IPCC, the Climate Change 2022 report, clearly puts the fact that we need advances in fledgling clean technologies, and we need breakthroughs in technologies to get there. And you probably all know as well about the International Energy Agency and their very famous statement that 50% of the technologies we will need to get to net zero to 2050 are not commercialized yet. So this is really our space. This is the space of EIB and not our sole space, but we are indeed betting on clean technologies, and we have been doing quite a bit. And historically, when I look into the way we have approached the problem, we have started, coming from a bricks and mortar bank, we have started with pumping more money into venture capital, as we know that Europe in particular is lagging behind the United States. We have now a portfolio of about 11 billion euros in venture capital. Then we broadened our financing to intangibles, RDI programs, so non-physical assets. Then we broadened our catalog of interventions to technical assistance and project preparation. And finally, we now innovate with additional blending solutions in order to soften the cost of finance. And yet, we feel that this is not enough. I recently have met quite a number of companies, in particular European companies, telling us, you know, we're quite good at seed financing, we're quite good at finding incentive schemes to kickstart innovation. But actually, when we need to raise big sums of money and we don't have the balance sheet against which we can borrow, we're stuck. We're kind of in a valley of death, as we call it, issue, and something needs to do about this. So these are really some of the issues that we're going to discuss in the panel today. What are the additional tools that we need to actually catalyze this additional funding for innovation and climate? I shall stop here in terms of introductory remark and leave the floor now to our panelists, thanking you once again for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to your insights into this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. And let me introduce you to our panelists before we start. It sounds like somebody's shoveling the last bits of coal to keep us warm, doesn't it? But anyway, we all know coal is dead and so is gas, and that's partly what we're going to be talking about. So let me introduce our panelists. Right, we've got some competition here, but I know you're up to the task. Now, Bertrand Piccard needs very little introduction. I think you still describe yourself as a Swiss explorer, which I think does sum up the approach that you have to exploring new innovative ways of tackling the challenges that face us. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that with you. We're also very happy to have with us Antoine Cyr, our co-host today from BNP Paribas, who is the head of company engagement, and will be speaking a little bit from your perspective about this challenge. Thierry Lepercq, next to you, is the founder and president of Ideal Ambition, which is bringing together about 30 companies, I believe, in the industry, specifically covering the green hydrogen value chain. So that's very exciting to hear more about that. Elina Kamenica is our Director of Climate Operations, so very happy to have her here as well to give us more perspective on what the EIB is doing and how we're working with our partners. And we're also very happy to have González Sainz de Miera, who is Director of Climate Change at the Chairman's area of Iberdrola, where, of course, we've been working with you very closely on a number of renewable energy projects, not least the flagship hydrogen project in Andalusia. So let me launch in right away. I hope the audience is managing to hear us properly despite the competition, and welcome also to our online audience, who I think are joining on YouTube. Later after this panel, we'll have a chance to have a discussion with the audience, take a few questions from you, and hopefully also with the online audience too, if our technology doesn't let us down. So perhaps I can kick off with the issue of regulatory environments. And looking a bit at Europe first, I want to just ask you, Thierry, first of all, if I may, to reflect a bit on the EU and the European Commission strategies that we've heard recently in relation to the energy crisis, the REPower EU, the Green Deal, the packages of various financial support programs to incentivize investment in green technologies. How do you think, what is your assessment of those programs, and what do you think is needed beyond that, or perhaps what kind of detail do you need to be to be seeing for a genuine incentivization? Okay, just keep talking and...
Yeah, I will start by sharing some experience. 14 years ago, my former company, Solar Direct, built the first solar park in France. And it took 9 months to have the permit. And we built this thing overall in 2 years. Now, for a similar project in the same country, it takes 4 times longer. And there's no surprise that Europe, which was leading at that time, is now falling back dramatically. When it gets to solar, for instance, Europe is less than 10% of the total volumes, while it was 70% 10 years ago. So permitting is a major issue. Now, moving to the positive side, what have we heard from Repower EU? And I'll focus on another figure. It's 20 million tons. People have not realized what that means. 20 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, including 10 million tons of imports and 10 million tons of own production, is an absolute game changer. And I'll quote another figure that will require 500 billion euros of investment decisions in the next 24 months. If you want to deliver that 20 million tons, which is now European policy, the question is 500 billion and then permits. So I would just summarize it, I could speak for hours and hours to say there is an excellent ambition, a very clear roadmap. Now the big question is how, both on permitting, infrastructure, and arguably financing as well.
Exactly. I mean, this is the key, isn't it? The ambition, the targets, the roadmap, it's all there. In a sense, it's the issue of this COP as well, isn't it? How do we actually get there? Let me throw the question, I'll come back to you, Thierry, in a minute, but let me throw the question to Gonzalo a little bit and ask him to kind of maybe pick up on that idea. What do you actually need in these packages to make that materialize into projects?
Okay, thank you very much and good morning to everyone. First of all, let me share some good news we are seeing in the energy sector. The first is the technological revolution of clean solutions. So it's not just renewables, but these batteries, green hydrogen. So for the first time, we are having an energy that is cheap and clean at the same time. Second good news is that the International Energy Agency released the World Energy Outlook last week, and we are seeing the peak of fossil fuels within this decade. So this is great news. And the third good news is that we are seeing an acceleration of the energy transition, basically not for climate objective, but for energy security. So we are having the packages in Europe, the packages in the United States, in Australia. This is very good. However, this is not enough. We are not moving at necessary speed. So, talking about implementation, that is key. We have ambition, implementation, and finance. Finance is the other big issue, especially for developing countries. Talking about implementation, we need to do 4 things. First, we have to promote information and awareness with the public so the public understand why we are doing that and why it's good for people. Second, we need robust policies, implementation policies. So we have the Fit for 55 package in Europe. I think it's the most ambitious package of policies all around the world, but we need policies to foster electric vehicles, heat pumps, green hydrogen in hard-to-abate industries. We need regulatory stability. That's very important because we need short-term decisions that can align with long-term objectives, and this is not always the case in some European countries. And the last thing you were mentioning is the administrative procedures. We have to streamline, to faster, to speed up all the administrative procedures. And the last thing is alliances. I think this is extremely important but maybe we can talk later, but we need alliances within business sector, we need alliances with environmental sector, with the environmental NGOs, because we have to develop a lot of renewables in Europe, and we need alliances with local communities to assure this is good for people. Otherwise, we will see a big social opposition in Europe to the energy transition, and in particular to the green technologies. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we will come back to that point. It very much touches on the whole issue of the just transition, where of course the EIB is also very active, and it's integral to our approach. But let me ask Antoine perhaps to complement a little bit on where you think the primary regulatory policy or public environment changes are, and maybe also give us a little bit of an insight into the financial products and the instruments that you at BNP Paribas are using to better support green technology. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I will concur with Gonzalo to say that there is still a big lack of environmental planning. I can maybe start with a little anecdote we had in France. A few months ago, there was a huge controversy in France about the use of barbecues. People saying that barbecue is part of the male culture and that finally we eat too much beef because barbecues are part of the male culture. And it was a big controversy. And there was no one to say, hey, we have a problem. We are eating too much beef. It's a problem. It's a reality. So we need to make a planning on how we will decrease beef consumption and give the people who are producing beef, who are in the cattle farmers, the people who are used to eat beef, we need to help people to adapt progressively. And we need to show what is the direction. We need environmental planning. It's when Gonzalo says that we need to explain people. If you don't give clear direction, you cannot explain people. So we need, it's not about granular policies. There are a lot of people who want to create very granular policies, but we need to have environmental planning. There is no possibility to succeed without this kind of planning. And when you have this kind of planning, it's easier for the technologies to adapt. It's easier for everyone to adapt. And finally, if you see what is happening with heavy industry, they are the ones that are able to understand the targets, for example, the climate target we have. And you can see that a lot of the industries are decarbonizing, because in the industry, and especially the heavy industry, they have understood that there is a path of decarbonization which is absolutely compulsory. And in the energy sector, 90% of the credit lines of Iberdrola are linked to sustainability KPIs. So when you see exactly where you want to go, it's much easier to take the proper decision. But the problem is that we know how to go in the industry, and that's why, for example, we created at BNP Paribas the Low Carbon Transition Group with 250 specialists to help our industry clients and partners, because where they have to go is very clear. But for a very large part of the population, a very large part of small businesses, for farmers, from a lot of people who are part of the world, it's still not clear where they have to go. So we need to have clear public policies, and then we can align.
Let me just ask you, before we move on to the next points about the actual sort of granular steps we're taking, how important is something like the taxonomy, about which there's been a huge amount of discussion for you, for example?
The taxonomy is very important because it's a framework. For example, for hydrogen, the taxonomy defines what kind of hydrogen is green or what kind is not green. So at some time we need to have conventions. And for me, the most interesting, I would say, input of the taxonomy is to create conventions that help to build decisions and strategies. Again, we don't need necessarily that granular regulations. We need to have some definitions of where we want to go and where we have to go collectively.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's get a bit more into the issue of green technologies. And as we forge ahead on that, our own technology on the screen is failing us completely, but never mind. You know, we don't need it. Elina Kaminitsa, let me ask you perhaps. We're all committed here to the idea of an acceleration in the green technologies, but this is an extremely convoluted and complex environment, made even worse by the crisis of energy, the war in Ukraine, and numerous other issues like the pandemic. So how is the EIB within this environment working? What are the main tools that the EIB has developed in terms of developing accelerated funding towards green technologies?
Does that work? Yes.
Yes.
Great. Before I answer the question, let me circle back on the importance of innovation that also in low carbon transition, what also Jean-Christophe mentioned. I think we all can agree that without innovation and further deployment of these new technologies, we will not be able to arrive to the net zero. And I think it is also important to remember that for example, in the energy sector, only some 1/3 of those technologies that we would need to transition are actually mature today. Bulk of these technologies that we know will need to be deployed and need to be, the deployment of which needs to be catalyzed, are still at the early stage of development or at the conceptual stage, and some of the technologies are not even yet there. So that as a sort of introduction. So what is EIB doing to try to accelerate, try to catalyze further capital in support of the innovation, but also then commercialization and rollout of these new technologies? We have last year financed investment in energy transition, in low carbon transport, energy efficiency, and R&D worth of 25 billion. And how we have done that? We have a toolkit available to us that currently is addressing the innovation cycle from the early stage development over the valleys of death, for example, with our venture debt product, to support of early commercialization, and also then deployment of more mature technologies. So we have the financial tools available that we can deploy. We have done it successfully, for example, in wind sector, where the EIB has accompanied the offshore wind segment to develop from the early 2000s, from the very nascent industry to its current stage. And we have been able to provide financing to support and accompany the transition. And we hope that we can replicate this support also when it comes to the emerging new technologies such as hydrogen or solar, or technologies that are still to be developed. What I would like to emphasize is that EIB can actually, I think, public and private partnerships in deploying new technologies in catalyzing investment are really key. And EIB can act as a bridge between public and private. And I think we have done this very successfully also in the innovation space, where we have been using notably the resources from the European Commission to develop products, financial instruments that do render risk-sharing capacities to private investors and help crowd in capital in support of ventures that may not yet be commercially financeable. And in this regard, I would like to sort of finish up by also emphasizing that it's not only about financing. We need capacity building, we need advisory to get this project up and running, and also to further aid the deployment. And I think here EIB has also pioneered some of the advisory and technical assistance elements and plugged them into our financing proposition to help the new ventures, new innovations to gain traction. And here again, the partnerships are key. I mentioned already our partner, the European Commission, but I think more important in the future will be also those innovative smart partnerships that combine public, private and support from international financial institutions. One of the examples is our collaboration with Breakthrough Energy and the European Commission to champion the new energy-related technologies in Europe and globally. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Elina. And last night we were having a post-COP cup of tea, and you know, the way that we do, we never stop talking about work. It was precisely the advisory point that you're making there, that colleagues were saying this is actually the real future of the public institutions, that this offer becomes more and more important. Bertrand, can I turn to you now? We mentioned the energy crisis. To what extent do you think this is having an effect on progress towards the green transition? Do you see this as a setback or as an opportunity? And let me also ask you in this question to reflect or maybe share with us any exciting developments you think are on the horizon in terms of breakthrough energies. Over to you. Yes.
Don't understand.
That's not working very well. Let's.
It doesn't. Okay. Yeah. We not to understand that the crisis with energy, or let's say the crisis with the war in Ukraine, is exactly the same than the crisis with energy. Because we base everything in our world on the quantity of the supply. So we want more suppliers of gas because there is a lack in the supply from Russia. We want more supplies of cereals because there's a lack in the supply from Ukraine. And in the climate situation, it's exactly the same. We want always more production of energy, more production of everything, but in both cases we don't understand that what we need is a reduction in the consumption. So we should not have more production, we should have more efficiency. More efficiency, that means that we have to learn to do more with less resources. And this is the most profitable thing to do. Because if our world today has a problem, and the economy of the world has a problem, it's because we produce too much at a cheaper price in order to beat the competition. So always more for cheaper with a very small margin of profit, and this cannot go like that forever, because the end is that we don't earn enough in the economy, and that we produce too much waste and consume too much resources. So in both cases, the war and the climate crisis, the answer is exactly the same. It is about efficiency. And the good news is that today, the most profitable thing is to implement the energy efficient technologies. So please stop to say that we need more innovation. We first have to use the innovations that exist today. The innovation that exists today could allow us to divide by 2 our energy consumption, our food production, our waste. All the technologies exist. And I'm not just inventing the fact that technologies exist. Since 5 years at the Solar Impulse Foundation, that's what we are doing every day. We are just identifying everywhere in the world the solutions that exist today that need to be used, that need to be implemented. And this is the role of finance today. The role of finance is not only to invest into startups to help them to develop their business. This is venture capital or it's private equity. It's a small part of finance. What finance needs to do now is to pay for the implementation of these technologies into infrastructures in order to reach a level where we will really make a difference. But of course, and I will end like this, of course for you in the financial world, it's a big change because you have to go from centralization to decentralization, exactly like the energy sector. Today we still work with big centralized power plants, bringing with power lines electricity outside of where it's produced. This is a model that is dead. Because if we want to develop a country that has no access to electricity today, and this has to be said because it's the Cup of Africa here in Sharm el-Sheikh, we need to understand that the only way to develop a country is to have delocalized, decentralized production of energy, which can only go through renewables. So it's a decentralization of production. But it's a decentralization of financement also. Because instead of funding coal power plant, oil or gas industry, which is very centralized, you need to finance very different and delocalized projects of implementation. So I agree that it's more work for you because you will have more customers that will each be smaller. But if you will put all the small customers together, it's a bigger source of money than if you keep on doing what you do now. So you have the possibility to earn more, but it will be more work. This is how I would summarize the situation.
Thank you, Bertrand. I guess, there'll be different views about small is definitely beautiful, but there's a room for big too. Let's stay with small for a second and let me ask you, Antoine. I mean, when we're talking about innovation, we're often talking about small companies who have excellent ideas. And what we find is that, companies will share the same story. They'll say, we've got the proof of concept, we've secured the equity, but the need to build a manufacturing facility and secure debt to scale up is not proving at all easy. So what, in your view, do you think we can do better in the EU to favor the ramping up and scaling up of these companies in fast-growing mode? That is the key. It is urgent.
Well, first of all, we probably need to have adapted and friendly regulatory requirements. For example, at BNP Paribas, we created with Bertrand the Solar Impulse Venture Fund, where we put our own capital in startups and in technologies that are at a very early stage. But this is very costly in terms of capital. And we do it on a relatively moderate scale. If it was less costly in terms of capital, we would probably be able to do it on a higher scale. A lot of the prudential requirements are created to avoid crisis, which is normal. But at a certain point, we really need to understand that we have to accompany a new economy, and we have to create new models, and we have to really to have smart regulations to accompany this. So this is the first point. The second point, again, if I see what we do to accompany companies that are at a relatively early stage, we do it in equity. But if we want to be able to do it in loans and to unlock loans to such company, we will probably need to have much more guarantees provided by the public sector. And we can build very strong cases with combining the public sector and our capacity to assess clients and to assess the risk. So there is certainly much more things to explore in the field of guarantees. And finally, the third field, which is very important to explore, is probably the field of blended finance. Because blended finance is about completely recreating, for example, a supply chain for a company with everyone doing his job. So in this, if to create a new sustainable supply chain at a certain moment, you need a technology that is provided by a startup, or if you need a certain kind of tech which is coming from sustainable agriculture, then you can have all the system working with banks or the market providing loans, and you can create virtuous circles. So we are still in the beginning, and again it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. We need at a certain moment to have environmental planning that give us a clear direction on how we have to go together, and then you can see startups, banks, public institutions, and finally the end consumer aligning on a common project.
Thank you very much. Let me welcome Rafael Hernandez from EDB Renewables in Portugal. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and sorry for the late.
Don't worry. We know what it's like here. You've arrived just in time, though, for your question. So that's good. We were talking a little bit about how we accelerate investment in particularly technologies for clean energy. And of course, you at EDP are well known for your support for that in the space of renewables, particularly. So let me ask you, in terms of what do you see in this complex world of rapidly changing technologies? What are the major market development signals guiding industrial partners in the energy transition space right now? And how do these help you take your investment decisions?
Okay. I think the fundamentals didn't change. I mean, as an investor, we always look for, regulatory stability. We look for, predictability on cash flows, which is connected to the first. And we look for markets which we have growth. We can have visibility on the growth in the market, meaning that we have a calendar of tenders and something similar to that. So that didn't change. Also, supranational guidelines, such as PowerU, helps, to have visibility on permitting, to help having more to facilitate, the interconnections and so on. But, the however is that nowadays we are facing a unique situation in the industry where, everybody agrees that renewables is part of the solution, but at the same time, we are facing some issues. I can mention, for example, the increase in CapEx. I can mention probably, my colleagues mentioned already, the problems that we are having in the supply chain. Also, we are seeing, the producer, the manufacturers of wind turbines struggling to have profits, and we are seeing this complex situation. Also, there is a huge gap, and it's important to mention, between where are the supranational guidelines, like, for example, REPowerEU, and what is actually happening in the markets, And let me give you 3 examples that EDP is facing today. I mean, France, for example. You know? In France, we have been developing 2 projects, 1 giga, for the last 10 years, more than 10 years. And I repeat, more than 10 years, you know. If we want to accelerate, this is, you know, not the way of doing things. Right now, the 2 projects are stopped in the Superior Court in France, waiting from the resolution of some allegations that we had on the public consultation. More than 10 years. Spain. In Spain, we go through double assessment of environment in some projects, which, you know, is kind of weird. Colombia is a great country, you know. They have the best wind resources, or some of the best wind resources in the world, you know. It's amazing. We have been developing 2 projects, 500 megawatts for the last 5 years, you know, and we are finding some barriers. So, making a long story short, just saying that we want to accelerate, but we are finding some barriers globally. And you know, just to wrap up, saying that the fundamentals didn't change, are the same, but we need some signals. We need some signals that basically are 2: policy stability and support of the governments.
Right. Okay. Message loud and clear there. You mentioned public consultations, and that's an issue that Gonzalo was talking about earlier, and I just want to come back to you about this community engagement issue, Gonzalo. Yeah, and staying with the Iberian Peninsula for a minute here. Gonzalo, your company, Iberdrola, is going to be announcing your new climate action strategy actually here in COP, and I think you're going to give us
in London. In London. So it's not here, it's in London today.
London. Okay. Yeah, you're not allowed to give it now, but you could give us a little bit of a preview. But particularly also in terms of your positioning on how you work with other stakeholders and parties to meet the objectives of COP27. You were talking earlier before we started the panel about the community aspect of this and how important that is.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is that for firms, it's really important to understand that our interest should be aligned with the interest of society. This is the key. And we are seeing that in Europe, we are members of the ERT, the European Roundtable of Industry, and some 5 years ago, traditional industries were not embracing the Green Deal agenda. And now they are understanding that this is the future, and they are defining new objectives, as we have today. We will define a much more ambitious climate objective and taking action. So I think we were talking about alliances, and I think there are 2 kinds of alliances. First is business alliances. So we need to work together, you know, firms of the same sectors with our value chain to understand the problems, to share good experiences, and to move forward quickly. Not just within the sector, we are working with other sectors. We are working with steel sector, fertilizers, to find solutions together from the energy sector, but also for consumers, for industry. And the other kind of alliances is alliances with local communities and with environmental NGOs. And this, I think, is extremely important. Why? Because we have to understand that we have to improve the way we do things. Because we have to develop a lot of renewables in Europe and all around the world. And I think we have to improve things in 2 ways. First, to assure that this is good for people and local communities, so we are working more and more, and EDP as well, with local communities, with regions, to co-create solutions, to assure that people get part of the benefits of these projects. And this is extremely important for public acceptance. And the other thing is biodiversity. So, climate action is really important for climate change. And climate change is one of the main threats to biodiversity. So, renewables are good for biodiversity. However, we also have to analyze the local implications on the biodiversity side. So we need to work with others, with environmental NGOs, to ask them for help. So how we need to develop these projects and where we have to develop these projects, and ask them, and this is very important, to explain society the implications of the energy transition. So the energy transition will be good for Europeans, will be good for people, lower energy prices, more energy security. However, we will have to install a lot of renewable facilities in Europe. We have to do it in a right way, but environmental NGOs should explain that to society. So we need to work with others, and other people need to work with us. So I'm convinced, my title is I'm Director of Climate Change and Alliances, because we really believe in Iberdrola that we have to work on alliances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me turn to the context of this COP27, the so-called Africa COP. Thierry, I want to come to you, if I may, and ask you for your view about what follows from Sharm el-Sheikh. We've been talking a lot about Europe, actually, and the conditions here. But this, of course, is a global problem, and it's going to need global solutions. So what do you think follows, and how do you think the developers, financial sector, and industry can cooperate better to make these technologies more available to the African continent?
Europe is 6% of global population, and soon it will be 3%. And we still consider that Europe is the world. Well, 97% of the world is out there. At 3:30 at the Mauritanian Pavilion this afternoon, we will have a presentation by the Minister of Energy of Mauritania. It's the Mauritanian Pavilion right across, with the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, with the Director General of ISA. So it's ISA, 120 countries, based in Delhi. And we will introduce a report saying the time has come for Africa. And we will present that report, 50 million tons of green hydrogen in Africa by 2035. And as a Mauritanian, well, I'm not Mauritanian national, but Mauritania is written on this thing. I can tell you what Mauritania wants to do. And I think we should listen to Mauritania. Mauritania is an extremely poor country with extremely bright leadership and extremely optimistic leadership. Anybody that is depressed, and it looks like 99% of us Europeans are depressed, I strongly advise to travel to Nouakchott. Nouakchott is not as pleasant as Sharm el-Sheikh. There's no diving sites. But you have a country that says, we are the next Dubai. We want to build a new country. Tell me one country in the world that says, I want millions of immigrants from Africa to build a new country. And that new country will be built on natural gas, they've started, and on green hydrogen. Yesterday, my good friend Abdesalam Saleh signed a framework agreement with BP for the construction of 30 gigawatts of solar and wind to produce green hydrogen. That's a stepping stone into that direction. So let's listen to Africa. And getting back to a conversation that we're having with Bertrand just a while ago, it's not Africa to serve Europe, even though bankability means bankable off-takers, and bankable off-takers happen to be in Europe. Hence the fact that it has to be not just an African thing, but a Euro-African thing. But Europe can also produce in Africa. And when last time I was in Nouakchott, one of my board members at Hydeal, who happens to be also an executive at ArcelorMittal, signed, not on the part of Hydeal, but on the part of ArcelorMittal, a framework agreement to invest 1 billion euros in a steel plant in Mauritania, which has an immense resource of iron ore, which is just exported as it is right now. Purely, 100% of it is exported. Nothing is transformed. No jobs, no nothing. Now, the plan is to transform that country to produce millions of tons of steel, millions of tons of fertilizers, which will bring food to Africa. So I have a message to Europe. We need Africa, because Africa is going to help us solve our horrendous energy crisis. And we need to replace, yes, we need to replace that natural gas with something. Because if you're not replacing it, our emissions will still go up. So African hydrogen is the way to go for Europe. But at the same time, Africa needs Europe, and it needs our investments. And most importantly, it needs that collaboration, that spirit of Africa is not our enemies. And I must say, I'm coming from a country that, even though we have the Francophonie thing, considers Africa as its enemy. Right now, France, most of the French people, it's a horrendous thing in French politics. Africa is the enemy, far more than Russia. And this has to change. We need to build bridges. And for me, if we have a message from this COP here, let's build bridges with Africa. Africa is 40% of the global population at the end of this century. 40%. Europe, 3%. The world is going to be African, and let's be African. I have my Mauritanian quasi-passport.
I want to hear more about that later. But Elina, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but before I do, Antoine, you want to make a point on top
Maybe
of that.
because I have just with what was just said with Thierry, is what we have in Senegal, just close to the Mauritanian border in Uzbek, we found a community, thanks to UN Women, which proves that we need to have coalitions. We found a community of 15,000 women who had created resilient and sustainable agriculture, who were doing an incredible job and who were absolutely desperate to convince a bank to fund them, because when you see them from far, you can believe that they are not competent, that they are not trustworthy, that they are not. In fact, they are extremely competent and trustworthy. They just needed maybe to get some help for their procedures and to be a bit more bankable. Was just a question of procedures and was not a question of skills, because over years they had acquired incredible skills, and there are 15,000 women farmers, and being able to identify such treasures will need a new and a different approach of what we have to do, and clearly to be able to understand that there are a lot of initiatives in Africa from which we have to learn.
Elina, can I ask you, what is the EIB doing as a public bank to scale up specifically green technologies in Africa? Where do you see the synergies between what we're doing in Europe?
Yeah, that's a very, very pertinent question. And I think I would like to start by saying that indeed we need to build on the lessons we have learned in Europe. And as said, we are facing a global problem, not the local one. I think many of the topics that have been discussed so far sort of resonate also and are high on our agenda. I would first mention the supportive regulatory and policy framework. It was mentioned that without stability, without sort of long-termism and transparency, it is very difficult to build sustainable investment strategies and indeed scale up innovation. So we are strengthening our work on policy dialogue and upstream work with the governments and stakeholders, promoters, to engage in these discussions. So policy framework, supportive regulation to build up ecosystems around the green transition. Then indeed, alliances, partnerships have been mentioned several times, and I think it's key. We cannot work anymore in silos. Alone, the public sector cannot solve the conundrum. The private sector, again, will not be able to scale up without collaboration with the public sector. And I think here, indeed, the MDB and international financial institutions can help to bridge and come up with innovative solutions, how to put together partnerships. And I think I mentioned already some of the examples that we have there. And finally, of course, it's about risk capital and financing. And I think we all agree that private sector needs to play increasing role also in Africa in getting these ventures off the ground. But I think we do need to leverage also on public resources in a smart fashion to mitigate some of those risks that are inherent in these investments. And so leveraging public capital, and again, MDBs and international financial institutions can play a role here. Again, the bridge builder, smart financing schemes, smart incentive schemes where interests are aligned between public and private. And I would like to finish up by saying that I think what is really important is the role of the financial sector generally, also in Africa, and building capacities in the financial sector to redirect financial flows to green investment. Capacity building is important, and EIB is really scaling up its capacities to help to provide technical assistance, help and support banks and promoters to green up their business and bring really the green into the core of their business strategies.
And just briefly, Elina, we've talked about public acceptance. To what extent do you think the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which of course the EIB is committing 1 billion for South Africa to, how central is that to the whole strategy of the EIB, do you think?
It is at the core of the strategy, of course, because frankly, the energy transition will not happen if it does not make economic and financial sense, but also social sense. You need to build consensus, you need to align interests, and you need to make sure that we are building sustainable, holistic ecosystems around green transition that allow economic prosperity and growth in the developing countries that is decoupled from the fossil fuels. So I really think we need to think about the energy transition and scaling up holistically, and also taking into consideration the social dimension and the just transition.
Thank you. I want to come back to...
It's a Dutch company that's selling decentralized solar energy solutions with a pay-as-you-go model, so helping the people with this. Also, GreenSource, a company that develops and manages centralized solar energy for the B2B environment. We believe it's important. And then we have a fund, a CSR fund, to help people, just give them grants so that they can develop. So just wrapping up, I believe that we should look at Africa not only at a utility scale level, but also at an off-grid level, let's say.
I think that very much resonates with what Bertrand was saying about the need for that decentralized approach. Bertrand, let me ask you just again to give us your perspective on what the role for Solar Impulse Foundation is precisely on impulsing the take-up of green technologies everywhere.
Yes, but to implement technologies everywhere, we have to understand really the role of finance. And I think the financial world understands its importance, but underestimates its power. Because you have the politic. The politic will work only if there is employment. If you don't have employment, the government falls or is not re-elected. To have employment, you need the economy. And to have economy, you need the finance. The financial world is the key to everything working in this world. So if you ask something, people will listen. Today, I'm sorry to say, but the financial world is losing the game against the green activists. Today you have the green activists who are criticizing the industry instead of helping the industry to diversify, criticizing the financial world, saying that the financial world is funding only what is polluting, and you are the most powerful party in this world, but you don't defend yourself well enough. You have to stand up and speak for it. Instead of wishing that the politicians will set the rules that you need, stand up and ask for these rules. Stand up and go to the customers, go to the countries, go to Africa and say, we are ready to invest in your energy transition. We are ready to invest in the solutions, to answer your question, that the Solar Impulse Foundation has identified and which need not only private equity to develop, but need customers to buy their product. This is what we need. So you need to be the ambassadors, the real ambassadors of this energy transition. You need to say clearly what you want to obtain. What is your political line? What is your economical line? What is your technology line? What is your moral line? What is your everything? If this is clear, we will have much more results, because then everybody will come to you and say, okay, we will like you to help us, we'd like you to fund us, and so on. But now you are too much in a reactive behavior instead of being in a proactive. Does it work? Okay. So you are too much in a reactive position instead of a proactive position, where you would allow yourself to obtain what you want if you ask for it, and if you ask for the rules, and if you ask for the legal framework, that will change the game. Because the legal framework is outdated. The administrative framework is outdated. You have oppositions, whatever you do. But if you say that you want something else in the rules, you will obtain it. My bet is that you will obtain what you ask, but ask for it.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty clear. Bertrand, thank you for that. I want to ask the audience if they have any questions or reflections on what you've been listening to for a little while. There's a gentleman there. I don't know what our arrangement for audience microphone is, but if we don't seem to have one, I'll invite you. If you're feeling brave, you can come up here actually with me. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll shyly stand to the side. Thank you to the panelists. I'm Hossam Alam from the Egyptian Climate Resilience Fund. My question is, a lot of energy transition projects seem to be about addressing additional energy demand rather than backing out existing, more polluting energy demand. How is that getting us closer to net zero? And if this conference is about loss and damage, then maybe Europe could be looking to lower its net energy demand or net energy consumption to make room for additional African energy consumption.
Okay, so does anyone want to try and reflect on that? I mean, it's a point that we're hearing a lot here at COP. Thierry.
The world receives in 5 days enough energy to match 300 million years of fossil fuels. 5 days, 300 million years. Africa is the most blessed part of the world. There is endless energy on this continent. And you know what? There's endless water. We haven't mentioned water. Our projects in Mauritania are based on water positive things. And by the way, we're having conversations with the Egyptian parties on that precisely. Bring immense volumes of water, which we need for hydrogen, through desalination. Today, there is a clamor for this. The idea that on is untrue. There is immense resources, and this continent clamors for it. Sentencing Africans to poverty because of a misconceived perception of the resources is morally unsustainable. We have to, right now, we have to develop energy production massively. That's exactly what we're going to talk about this afternoon. 50 million tons is 1/3 of Africa's current energy consumption. This is something that can be produced in a few hubs, including Egypt, by the way. So let's mobilize. We have an immense challenge in the next 50 years, because that's what I'm talking about. And that challenge...
Yes, but let's get back to the question that was asked, and maybe Elena, you have a go at it, which is a challenge to Europe. And actually, the subtext is that Europe is actually being rather hypocritical and needs to cut its own energy consumption and before it starts lecturing countries like Egypt and the rest of Africa. Is that a fair sum up of your question? You put it less aggressively. Okay.
Very shortly. Actually, it was already mentioned that energy efficiency, we need to achieve more with less. It's clear. At least in the short run, we have to be aware that we need to be more energy efficient, and we need to deploy the technologies that we have available to reduce the energy consumption, because in the end, the cheapest energy is the one that is not consumed. And I think this statement is very pertinent now as we are living through the energy crisis. You asked what is Europe doing to cut its own energy consumption, and I would like to mention that actually the EU had put forward very ambitious targets for energy efficiency, and is implementing regulatory measures, but also providing financial incentives to accelerate the energy efficiency investment, in particular when it comes to private households, but also in the industry. But here, I think the financial sector again has to take responsibility and do develop and try to channel more funding to energy efficiency investments, and develop instruments that possibly combine our blended instruments to incentivize in the short run, plus provide technical assistance and capacity building to financial institutions to make this business for them appealing, profitable, but also to support the end energy users to develop these investments. So some things are happening, but I take your point, but we have to do more. But I think we also have to then transport this knowledge and these experiences globally, including Africa, to allow the energy systems to be built on an efficient basis to start with as we scale up.
I think Bertrand wants to come in here. Yeah.
We don't imagine how much energy we waste and where we waste it. It is not only reducing the air conditioning, like yesterday where we were freezing in the hall, it was 14 degrees, everybody was freezing. And we were saying we're in the cup and it's ridiculous to waste that energy. It's not only this. Okay, it's all the way that we are producing in the industry, in the food, in absolute everything. We speak of food waste, but food waste, it's not only a problem of people starving, it's a problem of the fertilizers, all the energy needed to produce this food, to transport it. If you want to understand cost, it's energy saving in the microphone.
I apologize for our lack of technology.
Thank you very
on
much.
stage.
If you want to understand the real stupidity of our world, You have to know that story. I fell from my chair when I heard about it. 1/3 of the electricity of the world is used by electric motors in the industry. 1/3 of the electricity of the world, electric motors, for cranes, for machines, or for pumps. Pumps are pumping water or liquids or powder or air, and you know how they regulate the flow? They regulate the flow by increasing the resistance, but keeping the engine turning full power. So if you want to reduce the flow, you increase the resistance and you waste energy. Now you can have electric motors that are 60% more efficient and that can regulate the RPM in order to reduce the engine if you want to reduce the flow. All these type of things need investment in order to replace the completely outdated and inefficient systems into modern and efficient systems. This is the business of the century. It's the market share of the century. This is where we have to go. And of course, developing countries need that, and rich countries of the North also need it. So this is one thing. Then if you speak about the production of energy, we also need to replace what is polluting in the production of energy by what is protecting the environment. And here we have to know the statistics. The most poor 30 countries in the world get poorer every year because they are using foreign currencies to import oil and gas. It makes a negative commercial balance. It's clear that the money should not be used as a wasted cost to import fossil energy. It should be used to invest into delocalized production of renewable energy, where it creates jobs, and it's not a cost, it's an investment, because the money brings more money every year. So on every part of the puzzle, the poorest countries have something to earn. And this is why when we speak of the Cup of Africa for Sharm el-Sheikh, we have to understand that the only way for developing the poorest countries is to be more efficient, it's to be cleaner, and it's to modernize the energy production and the energy consumption. Basically, the only way for the poor countries to become richer is to fight climate change.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. I think we're coming to the end of our discussion now. I want to thank all of you in the audience. I think probably there's no more questions. Panelists, thank you so much for your contributions. I think over the last hour and a bit, despite the technological challenges here on the stage, we have explored very well the challenges, but also the very optimistic picture that there is, both from the financial world and from the developers and the industry itself. I think Bertrand's point, or if I could quote you there, saying that the financial world understands its importance but underestimates its power, is something for us to take home as co-organizers of the event, BNP Paribas and EIB. Certainly we can always do more, and that was a very relevant call to action. I wish you all great success in these enterprises. You know, and I think the other thing that came across today, apart from the very concrete suggestions, was the importance of public consultation, involvement of civil society, not as a box-ticking exercise, but as part of a sustainable investment in our future, if I can use that word. So thank you very much, Rafael, Gonzalez, Elena, Thierry, Antoine, and Bertrand. And thanks from me and all of you for watching. Thank you. Bye-bye.